it's not actually mine, it's my daughter's, but going to use it as a way to demonstrate absent but implicit. And it requires, you can just do it visually, or you can also just do a screen, screen, whatever, you take a picture of the screen and then cut it out. But the absent but implicit, so I don't know about where you are, but in the United States, northern United States, northeastern United States, our culture, if I do this, you are most likely paying attention to the ukulele. But literally, if you were to do a screenshot and cut the ukulele out, you'd see that in many ways the ukulele, is manifest as it is by the things that are around it. And so if you took out if you cut out the ukulele, and your attention would then be drawn to the things that are around it. And in the context of what's absent but implicit, those things that are around it suggest the ukulele. Get what I'm talking about? And this notion that we are, and in many ways, and are not described, and are not attended to, and they're kind of missed out. They're not. We talk about the ukulele. We don't talk about everything. And in this space, there's a lot of stuff, I mean, including me, there's a lot of stuff that's not the ukulele, but without which the ukulele wouldn't exist. And so the idea is that, the ukulele is present and explicit in the context of how we generally think about things. What's absent but implicit is everything else. And in this specific example, you can see that there's a bazillion things that are absent but implicit in the context of the ukulele demo that I just did. And this idea of what is absent but implicit invites us to consider those things and attend to those things. And so then you go, okay, so our conversations and sort of the way that we talk about things really invites us into this position of only talking about the ukulele. And so how do we get past that? Well, that's what all the questions that I keep talking about are for, because they really invite us past the focusing on the ukulele kind of thing to what's around it. And like, if you were to do this right now, you could easily say what's that, and I could say, what do you mean by that? And you could say that thing that's kind of beige and kind of has strings on it, and we could talk about that. But you could also say, what's that? Well, this thing, oh, this is interesting. And what's this? And what's wild is, in the context of this demo, you see this stuff and you probably can't even tell what it is because of the angle that it's at, but it might be easier to see it if I go like that, and then you see that that's the pop screen for this microphone that you can't actually see. But if I turn that, then it's easier to see that. But you have to ask questions to go, what might that be? And then this is an example of kind of changing a perspective, so that you can start to see that if you look at it from a slightly different perspective, it makes it more obvious about what it is. But these are all elements included in this notion of the ukulele. Now, the thing I touched on a little bit yesterday is that we aren't culturally kind of set up to ask these questions. There's a lot of stuff about, it's aggressive, or people don't want to talk about it, or it's private, or those notions are certainly a part of our culture. They're not neutral. They come from a place. And they also come from a place that's not about actually asking the person in their own experience. And so in many ways, the way that we kind of find a way through those sorts of invitations is to ask questions like, is it all right? I'm really interested in some things. Is it okay if I ask you some questions about some things? And so in that way, we're not sort of enforcing this notion. We're actually sort of intentionally and specifically and kind of ethically moving into a territory of maybe asking questions that a person's either not used to answering or doesn't want to answer. So then they can say no. And I just had a really cool conversation with a friend of mine about this, the possibility of saying no, the possibility of somebody asking you a question, you saying, I don't want to answer that question, and it being, that's totally cool that you don't want to answer that question. So creating this context within which questions can be asked that aren't even great necessarily or useful or important questions, and that the person that's being asked can make a determination about whether or not they want to answer those questions, and can actually make that determination. So also countercultural, but also not impossible, and not kind of the way things are. The notion that we can only attend to the ukulele is a cultural invitation that's not even accurate. And it's not a thing that kind of has always been, not in the least at all. In many ways, these narrative practices come from conversations with so many different people that it's sort of creating a new culture based on a kind of wider hybridization of lots of different experiences, but founded just in conversations with human beings. So human beings are capable of these conversations, which for me, it's like this culture that suggests what we can or cannot do that we're connected to now is not neutral, and it has not always been. So why don't we do it a different way? And the thing about that possibility of doing it a different way is that in my experience, these other kinds of conversations that go beyond sort of the first thing that we see, the ukulele in the front, are amazing. And they get to stuff, I've talked about how one of my students said, great thing about these questions is it helps me understand what I mean by the words that I use. Just realized I called myself Dr. Joe. There is a Dr. Joe in all this, long story. We'll get into that now. But I'm not him. I'm Dr. Joel with an L because I have the long hair. But so this construction of how things, what's possible and what's not possible, is really kind of made up. It's not like a thing. It's just like, kind of how we do things. And as I'm sure you're aware, we are changing how we do things all the time. And one of the things that I talked about early on in this COVIDness was that, the world kind of changed without anybody kind of doing anything. And so if that can happen, what else is possible that's actually not just bad? It's not scary, and it's not makes us lonely, and it's actually kind of amazing. And really, what I'm promoting in these ideas is that it's just about the kinds of questions, how we ask questions, how we come into questions, and the sorts of things that we think about that are now possible. So like, for example, this notion that we are invited by the culture. This isn't kind of how we are. We're invited by the culture to pay attention to the ukulele. But what about the keyboard? And what about that paper thing there? And what about that guitar over there? And what about all these other things? Well, you can ask questions into that too. And metaphorically, we encounter this all the time in our lives. And so maybe don't just ask a question about the ukulele. It's a thing to think about for today, for Possibility Friday. Hope everybody's having a great day, and I'll be back tomorrow.